The queen was enjoying a drink out on her balcony. She was most impressed with the scorpions assembled and mounted on the city walls. Sir Gregor stood silently in the shadows, as Queen Cersei often was not aware when he was near. Qyburn entered her study hastily, a recently delivered scroll in his hand.
More intel, my queen.
And what help does Dario wish to provide?
The dead have crossed the Trident at the Twins, and have now entered the Riverlands.
I see. Anything else?
Asked Queen Cersei, now offering her hand a portion of her own attention.
Quite more, your grace. The usurper has evacuated south to Dragonstone. Most of their forces destroyed, though both dragons survived.
A pity. I placed far too much faith in nearly 1 million marching dead men.
There is one more troubling piece.
Go on.
Queen Cersei demanded impatiently.
Dario informs us that once they dock in Dragonstone, they plan on attacking King's Landing from the air.
And why is that, I wonder?
Asked Cersei aloud, almost to herself.
Dario made no mention of the usurper's intentions or reasons.
I see. Well, it doesn't take a seasoned battle commander to see that King's Landing. Maybe the last defensible position in Westeros. She's coming for me, and she will have no idea that we will be ready for her.
Your orders, your grace.
Nervously asked the hand of the queen.
Send for Sir Hunts, and have Tywin removed from the throne room as a start. Then muster all the Queen's Guard.
Very good, your grace.
Qyburn responded. Queen Cersei continued to enjoy her wine as she watched the sun rise from her balcony. Sir Gregor towered above the other guardsmen as they stood in formation in front of the throne. Queen Cersei had donned light armor and briefed them of the situation in full. Loud clanging and crashing took place far from the throne, but Cersei paid it little attention. Lannister soldiers worked furiously as Queen Cersei spoke.
Sir Gregor, I've seen you remove a horse's head with a single swing of your great sword. I look forward to seeing you battle a dragon.
Admitted the Queen before she then turned to Sir Hunts, the newly installed captain of the Golden Company.
Keep your men out of sight from the air. We want to draw them in as far as possible.
As you command, your grace.
Sir Hunts bowed, acknowledging her latest order. He swallowed nervously before responding with an inquiry disguised as a concern.
My queen, if all goes according to plan, the throne room may very well be destroyed.
You think I wouldn't trade anyone or all of you for the death of a dragon or its queen? I would burn the Red Keep to the ground for any one of them.
Of course, your grace.
Responded Qyburn with a low bow. His quick acknowledgement was likely a signal to the sellsword to not press the issue any further. The sound of the city bells began to ring continuously. Queen Cersei stood with an inconceivable calmness and proceeded down the throne stairs with all the grace she could put forth. Sir Hunts, the Mountain, and Qyburn watched as the Queen walked the length of the throne room. She briefly stood a simple step in front of the scorpion aimed and loaded at the throne on the far side of the room. She slowly turned to face her throne, her Queen's Guard patiently awaiting her orders. Sir Gregor remained at the foot of the stairs leading to the throne, his blood-red eyes still fixated upon the Queen of the Seven Kingdoms. The Queen drew a deep breath before passing what would be either the command that would define her reign or the order that would end it.
2 arms.
The city bells began to ring as Drogon and Rhaegal dropped out of the clouds. Jon directed Rhaegal to the city walls on the Blackwater side. He began lighting the scorpions aflame as Daenerys hovered above them. The Queen knew she could not fly any lower. She carried Lord Gendry and allowed Jon to act as the protector of her mission. She was not accustomed to being protected in the sky, but her patience had grown knowing what she was about to do. Jon then circled the Red Keep at a low altitude and brought Rhaegal to a hover beside her. Jon met her eyes and she knew it was time. Both dragons lowered to parallel with the throne room and together unleashed furious firebolts. The castle screamed in protest. Rock melted and turned to molten lava. Most of the stones that did not have a chance to melt were blasted inward with the force of the firebolts. A devious smile spread across Daenerys' face as she pictured Cersei's surprise at being crushed and burned from her seat of power. The bells continued to ring as a handful of archers had gathered in formation on the ground. A small volley of arrows struck Drogon's underside. Queen Daenerys figured it to be a useless gesture, and she remained correct. The volley did not interrupt Drogon from savaging the Red Keep's walls. Jon was the first to cease fire, followed closely by Daenerys. What remained of the stone bricks glowed red hot. Daenerys withdrew to allow Jon to enter first. Sir Gregor stood fast at the base of the throne. The smoke, ash, and fear did not persuade him to retreat. He grasped the hilt of his sword and slowly climbed the stairs. The fireballs had stopped, and Sir Gregor stared into the clear blue sky that now could be seen beyond the throne. The throne drew closer and closer. More smoke dissipated with every step. Gregor's eyes widened at what charged at him. Through the smoke and flame, almost as if it had wings itself, a white blur filled his vision. The large white direwolf had leapt over the throne and violently impacted Gregor's breastplate. The force of the impact knocked him off his feet and he crashed onto his back. Still, Ghost stayed engaged. His helmet was ripped from his skull as the direwolf's teeth sank into Gregor's neck. The dragons appeared perched on what remained of the walls. The beasts bathed the throne room in fire, keeping the bolts above where Ghost and Gregor struggled. Daenerys had finally entered her father's throne room. Queen Cersei stood defiantly just out of the dragon's range in the rear of the room. She casually turned and marched out of sight, revealing what lay behind her. A flicker of fear entered Daenerys' mind as she noticed the scorpion, loaded, and aimed at her child. He jerked sideways and ejected Sir Beric and Lord Gendry. Both men gained their feet and charged at the soldiers protecting the scorpion. Drogon continued to wail and stumble. Rhaegal was still perched on the wall and could not see beyond Drogon. The Hound hastily dismounted Rhaegal and charged towards the injured dragon. Arya followed suit, but not before meeting her brother's eyes. She had expected him to protest until he spoke aloud to her.
Go on then.
Jon yelled to her. As Drogon stumbled, Jon took his first look at the Iron Throne. It was different from what he had envisioned. His own father's birthright lay before him. Jon swallowed and whispered to his beast, and the dragon was quick to oblige. Rhaegal began heating the throne in short bursts until current events would allow Lord Gendry to take charge. An odd thought entered Jon's mind. Houses Targaryen and Baratheon fought for control of this throne a mere 2 decades prior, until the sons of these same houses would join forces in order to destroy it. The Hound was drawn to the wailing of Drogon. He grasped the bolt that had struck his left shoulder. He pulled the bolt free as Drogon protested his displeasure. The beast then met the Hound face to face. He could see the flames resting in the back of his throat and numerous teeth missing. Drogon's nostrils flared as the Hound faced down the fierce fire breather. After a few tense seconds, Arya distracted the Hound as she cut down a charging Queensguard. She reset herself and charged at the scorpion with the Hound now on her heels. The Hound saw Arya streak past him. Then he had noticed her destination. 2 Queen Guards had fallen, but the 4 remaining had Lord Gendry and Sir Beric surrounded. Arya had leapt onto the nearest one's back and opened his throat with catspaw. Once he had stumbled, she kicked free of him and sent his body crashing to the swordsman next to her. Lord Gendry then split his skull into the ground with his warhammer. The Hound stood watching Arya in amazement. She yelled at Gendry to get back to Daenerys, and he sprinted back across the throne room. A low swing, and Arya severed the leg of a guardsman to the bone. As he fell, she slashed at his throat. The Hound questioned how much Arya was enjoying herself, and was curious to his own level of encouragement of her bloodlust. While Arya was on a knee, another guardsman rose over her. She calculated for another attack, but her next move was rendered moot. A sword burst through his chest and was lifted off the ground, swung and disposed of to the side. Towering over Arya as she regained her feet was the Hound. The two remaining guardsmen were joined by another half-dozen Lannister soldiers that had reloaded the Scorpion for another shot. The Hound helped Arya to her feet as she drew needle from her belt. The Hound saw the Scorpion take aim as he charged. He saw the adjustments being made and the man on the trigger draw and hold his breath. The Hound stopped dead in his tracks and raised his sword as the bolt fired. He brought his sword down and severed the bolt in half mid-flight. The Hound then turned to Arya, quite pleased with himself. As he turned towards her, his face was drained of all amusement. Lady Arya finally knew why, as a hand grasped her hair from behind and raised her off the ground. Arya feebly stabbed and slashed with needle, but to no avail. The mountain bounced her head off of one of the nearby pillars. He still firmly grasped her hair as his sword remained sheathed. Sandor guessed Gregor did not want Arya's death to come quickly. Her suffering was Gregor's enjoyment, a feeling Sandor knew all too well. The Hound raced toward them and felt every impact squeeze his own beating heart. Once, twice, and a third time Gregor pounded Arya's face with a closed fist raised from above his own head. After the first strike, Arya ceased making any sound. The second strike led to Arya's body made limp. The third impact led to the slight clang of needle falling to the stone floor of the throne room. The Mountain's attention was now on Sandor as he discarded Arya's limp body. He threw her with all of his strength. Sandor watched as her body slid and thumped against the adjacent wall. The only part of Arya remaining in front of Sandor was a fistful of her hair still clenched in Gregor's fist. Before the Hound stood his brother, Gregor Clegane, now unmasked and as ugly as the Hound himself. He raised his greatsword with vengeance on his mind and murder in his heart. But for the first time in his life, he would act as vengeance for another, rather than himself. Perhaps this time around those bastards called gods would favor him. Sir Beric and Lord Gendry had retreated to the dragons as the burning of the throne was nearly there. Molten metal had begun crawling down the stairs. Lord Gendry and Sir Beric had donned their dragon hide gauntlets and began removing sword after sword. A long stretch of blue leather collected nearly a dozen glowing swords. Lord Gendry wrapped the leather around and secured it with twine. Jon watched as the pair of them secured the steel from atop Rhaegal. He then walked his dragon further into the throne room, looking for his sister and his direwolf. Ghost had limped toward him out of the smoke, his face bleeding from a deep gash on his snout and his chest and front legs covered in blood. Jon was not sure if it was from his wolf or his victim. Ghost stumbled past Jon and approached Rhaegal from his tail and carefully made his way onto the dragon's back. Jon slowly had Rhaegal creep deeper into the throne room. He had now reached further than Drogon. Lord Gendry was now atop Drogon, and Sir Beric was about to start his ascent onto the dragon's back. A thunderous crash was heard as a pillar tumbled to the floor. Jon watched as the Hound pulled himself back to his feet, just before Gregor landed another blow. The Hound blocked it, and was forced down to a single knee. The mountain swung laterally and caught Sandor's hilt, which lost him his grip and sent the sword spiraling into the smoke. Sir Gregor lunged with a stab that the Hound sidestepped and grasped the wrist and elbow of his brother. The Hound groaned with all his strength and finally heard a snap. The Hound then headbutted the back of Gregor's elbow, dislocating it entirely. The mountain's sword fell to the ground and Sandor to his knees. Gregor wrapped his hands around his brother's neck and began squeezing the life out of him. The Hound reached for his brother's sword, feeling dizzy as he quit stretching for it and tried to free himself from Gregor's grasp. Sir Beric's sword was still aflame as he slid it across the stone floor. The Hound retrieved and brought the flaming sword about. He expected it to extinguish, but it seemed to glow brighter now. The Hound buried sword upward into Gregor's gut. The flames caught his clothing on fire under what remained of his armor. Gregor released the Hound and stumbled backwards a few steps. The sword protruding from him was still aflame. The Hound fell forward onto his hands as he attempted to regain his breath. A strong set of hands pulled his head skyward. He felt those hands envelope his entire head and eye sockets as the pressure began to climb. The Hound then cried out to Jon.
Burn us!
Demanded the Hound, and Jon's heart sank. The two brothers were in range of Rhaegal, and Jon turned to Daenerys to see that Sir Beric was on board. The mountain was the only enemy remaining in the throne room. Jon considered dismounting his dragon, defending the Hound, and then he could search for Arya.
Burn us, damn you!
The Hound pleaded, his voice now sounding of utter desperation. His attention was brought forward again when he heard Sandor for a third time.
Please.
The Hound begged. King Jon closed his eyes and reluctantly muttered. Rhaegal screeched and engulfed the brothers in flames. When Jon opened his eyes again, he saw a large mass burning, and two others off to the side rolling across the floor. The mountain crumbled into a pile of ash, and Jon looked towards the other two. One was not moving, and the other rolling on the throne room floor, attempting to put the flames out.
I wanted him to suffer. I hated him. I hated him. That's not a lie.
Arya woke and stumbled to her feet to see the Hound on his knees. Arya had acted without thinking, and she started running. She heard Sandor scream, "Burn us!" and Arya repeated the words of her Braavosi dancing master, "Not today." Her eyes glanced at Jon as she sprinted. She prayed that Jon would hesitate, and he did. Arya leapt and grasped the collar of the Hound's armor as the three were engulfed in golden flames. The two rolled across the floor. The pain was immense. Arya's nose filled with the smell of charred flesh and scorched hair. Her right arm seared in pain, as did her neck and face. She noticed her cloak was on fire, and she rolled across the stone floor purposely to extinguish them. She crawled over to Sandor and was mortified to take in the sight. His eyes were gaping bloody holes, his armor melted to his chest. His head and face were completely devoid of hair. He was bald, burned and gasping for air. Arya wrapped her arms around him and placed her face on his chest.
Is he dead?
Garbled the Hound. Arya's eyes shifted over to the pile of ash that seconds previously was the Queensguard near the top of her kill list.
Yes, that bastard's dead. Dead by fire.
Cried Arya to the Hound's stout grunt of satisfaction.
Bloody fitting.
The Hound responded as Arya recited her shortened list inside her own head: Cersei, the Red Woman, and ill in pain.
You outlived him.
Congratulated Arya through her tears. Sandor's face was void of all expression, but Arya knew he needed to hear that. She never felt as helpless as the day her father lost his head in front of the Sept of Baelor, nearly the same the day her mother died on the riverbanks of the Trident at the Twins. This is the same feeling she swore she would never allow herself to feel again. The only thing worse than loss was the fear of loss. It was a weakness that must be purged.
Are you hurt?
Sandor interrupted her thoughts, though she responded quickly.
Not a bit.
Arya lied, for she knew Sandor could not see.
Didn't you once tell me to burn in hell?
Now you decide to listen to me.
Arya lamented as the pain of her burns were now setting in.
Would you grant a dying man one request?
I'm not known for it, honestly.
Arya replied with a slight smile that made her face sting. She pulled Catspaw from her belt, assuming to know Sandor's request.
Don't end up like me.
The Hound pleaded. This was the last thing Arya expected to hear, as she remembered just reciting her kill list to herself.
It's my time then. I won't beg you again, girl.
Arya picked up her head as part of her face stuck to Sandor's chest. She could feel her flesh peeling from her face. The pain was immense, but she knew Sandor was experiencing worse. She raised Catspaw and cried,
You won't have to. Thank you, Sandor.
She whispered as she drove her blade into her protector's heart and watched him take his final breaths. Arya reached up to close his eyes and realized that he had no eyelids remaining. Her head again slumped as she wept. A strong set of arms again raised her off the floor. She almost protested at Jon for taking her from Sandor until she realized it was Gendry. He scooped her off the floor and carried her onto Rhaegal. Queen Daenerys and Sir Beric, along with their steel, had already departed the Red Keep. Jon, Gendry, Arya and Ghost then took flight, leaving a smouldering Red Keep in their wake. Yara Greyjoy's ship was sailing through the God's Eye. Bran was on deck watching young Valen and little Sam practicing tying knots under Yara's supervision. Sam was changing the bandages on his severed leg as Bran was going in and out of a trance. He was trying to see the events going on at the Red Keep. Bran was now up on his feet, walking towards the ship's railings. They were sailing past the Isle of Faces, a mysterious island in the center of the God's Eye. Its historical significance was deep in the legend of the Long Night. It's where the first men and the children of the forest enacted the Pact and became allies against the children's rogue creation, the Night King. Bran admired the isle from afar. He squinted but couldn't believe his eyes. Numerous children of the forest were on the beach. They appeared to be waiting for Bran. He then woke to see Samwell sitting next to him.
Anything interesting?
Asked Sam with a vague interest, assuming to get little more than a head nod from the three-eyed raven.
Time will tell.
When was the last time you gave a bloody straight answer?
Demanded Sam, slightly frustrated at the confirmation of his own assumption.
You're nervous about their mission.
Bloody likely. Queen Cersei is bloodthirsty, and she knows they're coming.
Responded a worried Samwell Tarly.
I am trying. Present events are more difficult to see.
Admitted Bran, and Samwell continued the conversation.
You said the Night King has tried to kill many three-eyed ravens.
Indeed.
Bran replied as his eyes peered off to the passing Isle of Faces.
Is it too far-fetched to think there has been more than one Night King?
It is possible.
You believe it likely?
Possible. Perhaps even likely.
Could you search for the answer?
I could try. But I don't know where to look, and would have to comb thousands of years. I could be searching for months, or even years.
Bran revealed, and Sam looked disappointed in the news. Harrenhal had come into view on the horizon. The Dothraki were riding hard along the lake's coast. Bran thought it was a stroke of luck they were arriving at the same time. Slowly they approached the docks that stretched far into the water. The deckhands tied up the ship as its passengers departed. Lady Yara and Osman were entrenched in conversation about securing the castle when Bran was violently jerked into a trance. Samwell had to catch him to keep from falling over. Bran exited the trance as quickly as he entered it.
Something went wrong.
Bran admitted to Samwell. Sam was worried and pressed Bran for more information. Bran was carried past the dock and into the musty, deformed castle. Every artifact they passed attempted to pull Bran back into a trance. He could hear the roars of Balerion and the screams of Harren's sons. Bran realized this place was deeply entrenched in magic right down to its foundation stones. He settled in one of the bedrooms in the highest remaining tower at Harrenhal. Bran watched as the Dothraki rode in from across the countryside. Bran sat near the window in his tower bedroom. The roof leaked and the room had a musty smell. It had been exposed to the elements for many years, he thought. Bran pondered Samwell's questions. He considered attempting to investigate the Night King's past, but the risk was too great. He always seemed to know when Bran was present. The Dothraki screamers then snapped Bran back into reality, though the line separating the two had begun to blur in this strange place. Wind whipped past Arya's face. Tears that poured from her eyes made her face sting even more. They were still in the air and Arya was aware of their destination. She struggled to open her eyes as all the sounds that surrounded her were muffled. She felt herself secured to the dragon, yet she was not holding on. Once her sight slowly returned, all she saw was Gendry. He held her carefully as to not further upset her wounds. Gendry tried to speak to her, but she could not make out his words. Slowly, Arya's senses were coming back to her, and the shock of her injuries temporarily subsided. She continued to lie in Gendry's arms, his right forearm supporting her head, his left around her waist. She tried to sit up, and Gendry gently squeezed her to keep her in place. She appreciated his concern, as this felt like a dream to her. She reached up to touch his face, and it did feel real. The wind settled, and Arya could sense they had begun their descent. All she could see was the dark grey sky overhead, until the towers of Harrenhal slowly crept into view from behind her. Fitting the place Gendry and her originally sought to escape from was now their refuge. Rhaegal finally gently touched down as the snow was deeper than Arya had expected in the Riverlands. It was cold, but Arya was used to colder. Gendry kept his arm around her as they walked. Jon was close behind them, his face full of concern.
All right then.
Lord Gendry asked Jon while still supporting Arya's weight.
Drogon was hurt. Severely, I fear. They fell behind, and Daenerys told me to continue. I think they may have landed to have him rest.
Jon admitted as Rhaegal immediately took back to the sky. Jon noticed as he headed back the way from which they came. Samwell hurried toward them. He immediately noticed that Arya was hurt. He led them towards Bran in the last remaining intact tower in the castle. The next morning, Samwell had his hands full tending to Bran, Varys, and now Arya. Jon and Sansa had then entered Arya's room.
Feeling better?
Just eager to get on with it.
Arya answered with a painful grimace.
What does come next?
We don't know yet. Gendry is preparing the forges. If Queen Daenerys is not back by morning, Ser Jorah and I plan on mounting a search.
We all need to speak on an urgent matter.
Bran recommended. Jon closed the door to ensure the Starks had their privacy.
I've been thinking on the cave, and the spiral under the First Men.
Go on.
The spiral was under the First Men, and the children.
Bran added, and Jon slowly digested this observation.
We need to speak to the children of the forest.
Bran suggested decisively to Jon's skepticism.
Any idea where we can find members of an extinct race?
Asked Jon sarcastically, but Jon immediately realized that any question he was to ask, no matter how absurd, could now be answered by his omniscient brother.
In fact, I do, Jon.
I should have known better.
Muttered Jon under his breath to no one's surprise.
There is more to what is happening than we know.
Aye, where do we look then?
The Isle of Faces, in the center of the God's Eye. They've been calling to me, rather to us, all of us.
Bran corrected, and Jon noted the seriousness of his tone.
That makes sense. Daenerys told me of her dreams of weirwoods surrounded by water.
Responded Jon, and Bran stared off into the distance at this latest news.
We will venture out as soon as you're able.
Jon was then interrupted by Bran.
No. I've already brought the dead to the children's doorstep once. The Night King will follow me there. You go, and take your best with you.
Recommended Bran, gesturing at Arya, and Jon agreed in silence.
Lord Gendry,
Announced Jon, changing the subject.
he said he could use your expertise in the forges. When you are able.
Suggested Jon. His worry met with Bran's blank stare. The noise they all heard was unmistakable. Jon hurried to the tower window to confirm what he had feared. The battle horns continued to blow as Jon turned to face Bran.
The dead are here.
We better welcome them then.
Responded Arya. She rose from her bed and cloaked herself with a grimace. She fixed needle and catspaw to her waist and attempted to walk briskly, but did so with a slight limp. She eventually joined Jon on the Harrenhal walls. She had managed to scrounge up a bow where the armory once was. They were eventually joined by Ser Jorah, Brienne, and Ser Jaime. The dead were less than 100 paces from the castle walls. Arya thought this odd, as did Ser Jaime.
They're not charging as they did at Winterfell.
No, they're not.
Responded a puzzled Jon. The archers they assembled had prepared a volley. Jon had them stand down and then turned to Ser Jorah.
Have the Dothraki dismount.
Commanded Jon to a surprised Ser Jorah. To Arya's amazement, she was now seeing what Jon had. The dead walked along the walls and continued past them. No charge, no wave, or an assault of any kind. They were not condensed or energetic. Jon's intuition was correct. They were not here to fight. Whatever they desired lay well beyond Harrenhal. From atop the walls, Arya had a good vantage point of the surrounding landscape. A deafening roar was heard overhead, and their attention was pulled skyward. Drogon, Queen Daenerys, and Ser Beric had finally arrived at Harrenhal. Arya noticed the relief spread across Jon's face, but it again turned to concern. Drogon was airborne but seemed to be falling, and then flying again. His descent was rapid. It was doubtful he would clear Harrenhal's high walls. Jon seemed to notice this as well when he left his position in a hurry. Arya sprinted after him to the west gate. She was struggling to keep up with her new injuries. She now knew Jon's concern was Drogon striking the wall and destroying it. The west gate was opened just as Drogon struck the ground. Drogon caused a crater-like hole just outside the Harrenhal walls. Arya waited to see movement as she sprinted toward the beast. She overtook Jon as he paused to clear the area of a few scattered dead. Arya saw Ser Beric's flaming sword light up the grey horizon beyond Drogon. Ser Beric had the queen in hand and was sprinting towards the gate. Drogon regained his feet and spat short firebursts at the dead. Jon was engaged near the gate where he was met by Daenerys and Beric. Arya saw the steel wrapped in blue leather laying in the snow. She sheathed catspaw and scooped up the steel. She ran as fast as she could towards the gate. Brienne now had come into view as she sped past Jon and Daenerys. Arya knew something behind her was close. She was just a few steps from her when Brienne shouted,
"Down!"
A grey blur had leapt over Arya and landed on the ground with a thud. Arya turned to see what she thought to be Ghost. Brienne attempted to pick up Arya as she turned to see her savior. Ghost's coat had seemed to now have streaks of grey. Arya continued to take in the scene, holding the heavy steel in her hands. Ser Jorah had relieved her of it as the group continued to seek refuge behind the gate. Arya refused to be whisked away and could not help staring at the direwolf. Soon one wolf became 4 and then 10. Now near 20 wolves surrounded Drogon. Arya now knew this wolf was not Ghost. Finally, Nymeria had returned to her. Jon tried to pull Arya through the gate as she refused and sped off to fight the dead alongside her wolf. Arya cut down the first she encountered and reset for the next. The dead was sparse and capable of being pushed back. Arya was about to engage another when it was cut down by Jon. The wolves were now climbing up the dragon's back to pick off the dead that had crawled onto him. Drogon lacked the strength to remove them himself. Soon, Jaime, Beric, and Brienne joined the Starks in defending the injured Drogon. Minutes passed, and the dragon finally lifted its head. Daenerys called to Drogon from the gate. It stumbled to its feet and shook the dead and wolves from his back. His shoulder bled profusely and speckled the ground and warriors below. After a few thunderous steps, he stumbled again. With extraordinary effort, the great beast pushed himself towards his mother's calls. The swordsmen and wolves collapsed on the gate just behind the dragon. Once inside, Drogon collapsed and Daenerys approached his face. His nostrils flared as Daenerys patted his snout. The gate was reinforced as Arya searched frantically for her wolf. Off to the side, away from the commotion, sat Nymeria. Arya approached her slowly and embraced her underjaw with her palm. A slight groan was heard, and Arya knew this was her wolf. Nymeria lay upon the snow, slightly panting. Arya sat with her until well after dark. Ghost eventually joined them as Arya now lay in the courtyard, her wolf's chest supporting her head. Sir Jaime, Sir Jorah, Arya, Gendry and Lady Sansa waited in the Harrenhal main hall. Jon and Daenerys entered, and all parties stood. Queen Daenerys then spoke first.
Drogon was gravely injured, but it appears our mission was an overall success.
Queen Daenerys informed the War Council. Her voice shook on the final word of her report, and Jon decided to take the reins.
Sandor Clegane, along with his brother, were also lost. The steel has been brought to the forges. Is there anything else that is needed for the process?
One step is not clear. Though Bran said he could assist me, I believe we have a high chance of success.
Get started then. When the steel is forged, we will be traveling again.
Jon informed the council. Lord Gendry stood and exited the room. Waiting outside the hall were Ghost and Nymeria. The two entered through the door Lord Gendry had left open.
Samwell has examined Drogon's wound. An infection has spread quickly, though the wound was barely suffered 2 days ago. Poisoned, likely.
Where is Dario? The Dothraki and Second Sons rode together to Harrenhal, did they not?
Aye, they did. It might be better if we spoke alone on this matter.
Very well.
Responded Queen Daenerys curtly.
The next order of business will include a retrieval from Winterfell.
Jon added, and this caught Lady Sansa and Arya's attention.
We need as much Valyrian steel as we can gather. I imagine Heartsbane is still in the broken tower in the Godswood. If the two of you are up for it.
Jon asked, though he didn't have to.
When do we leave?
Asked an excited Arya. Her face cracked a smile that she immediately regretted. The burns on her face had started to scab over, though sometimes they would crack and bleed.
We'll depart immediately. The army of the dead continue to march past us, and the threat from them remains low.
Jon informed them. Queen Daenerys agreed, still noticeably worried about Drogon.
Gather what you need and meet me in the courtyard within the hour.
Sir Jorah stood and made his way toward Daenerys. Arya and Lady Sansa stood to exit before Sir Jaime had engaged Arya, and Jon kept a close eye on them.
I offered your brother his father's steel. He politely refused me.
And you thought I would accept?
Perhaps I did.
Answered Sir Jaime, hoping his conversation with the young Stark would fare better than their first under the shadow of the Winterfell weirwood.
I was taught it was bad manners to refuse a lord's offer.
My father taught me the same.
It was Tywin Lannister that first said that to me in this very room.
Responded Arya starkly as she passed Sir Jaime without hearing his retort. Sir Jaime was left disappointed after failing again to return the Stark family sword. Jon, Sir Jorah and Queen Daenerys were all that remained in the hall.
So what of Daario Naharis?
Lord Tyrion and I have suspected a spy in your court for some time. The Red Keep meeting, the Casterly Rock offensive, and the most recent steel retrieval.
announced Ser Jorah, and Queen Daenerys seemed lost in thought.
That doesn't make sense. The timetables don't match.
Aye, but they do. If he was being informed from across the sea by an accomplice.
And you presume Lord Varys?
Inquired Queen Daenerys to the general silence in the room.
I fear that may be true. It would make a proper motive for the assassination attempt.
I want Lord Varys guarded day and night. If he survives his wounds, he will face a trial.
Yes, my queen.
Answered Ser Jorah, meeting eyes with Lord Tyrion.
Where is Daario now?
Asked Queen Daenerys now for a third time. Ser Jorah unrolled a scroll and handed it to her. She read it as Ser Jorah continued his persuasive speech.
I feigned my injuries to remain behind and lure him into a trap. This message was meant for Queen Cersei. When I confronted him, we crossed steel.
Ser Jorah finished as Daario's end was implied. Fury welled in Daenerys' eyes as Ser Jorah offered her a distraction.
Please forgive my dishonesty, Khaleesi. I attempted to fulfill your command to flush out this snake.
Betrayal apparently has become the norm in Westeros. We'll need to send word to Captain Strickland that he may be in danger.
I'm afraid that will be a useless gesture. Lord Tyrion and I discussed this at length. Lord Varys knew of Strickland's defection, as did Daario, we assume.
We're losing allies faster than the Night King can kill them off. Thank you for your loyalty, Ser Jorah. It is becoming a rare commodity these days. If you would please excuse us.
Asked Daenerys as Ser Jorah bowed and exited the room. Jon then took his queen in his arms, now that privacy had presented itself, as she was obviously distraught.
Our losses could have been worse,
Whispered Jon in an attempted comforting tone.
If Drogon dies, it's entirely my fault. I left Daario jaded.
If there is anyone who could understand, it's your husband. I still carry the marks of betrayal.
Daenerys' thoughts instantly dwelled on the 6 deep scars spread across her king's chest.
We've all experienced insurmountable losses, but we still have to fight. And you were born to.
Jon added, and Daenerys cracked a sliver of a smile.
You better get going, so you can get back to me.
Daenerys added as she kissed her king through her tears and wished him good fortune.
I may have some good news, for when you return my king.
Rhaegal lapped around Winterfell carrying the 3 Starks on his back. Most fires had since burned out in these past few weeks, though a few small cinders continued smouldering. Sansa continuously blinked to wet her wind-whipped eyes. Her first experience on Dragonback had been exhilarating, only if under a more positive set of circumstances. Jon landed Rhaegal in the Godswood. It was the only place not littered with bodies. The smell of the decay had subsided, probably due to the fires Jon had unleashed onto their home. Lady Sansa expected Arya to head towards the broken tower, but instead she approached the great weirwood tree. There she was, gathered around a horse carcass that had not been burned.
That's Bran's horse,
observed Lady Sansa, slightly relieved.
It is. Here is where he lost his leg. Again. Help me with the saddle.
Asked Arya, and the 2 Stark ladies freed the altered saddle from the horse.
It's odd now, isn't it?
Asked Lady Sansa rhetorically.
And what is that?
Inquired Arya as she heaved the heavy saddle about.
I experienced the worst people alive, right here in our home. But it never felt like somewhere else. Now it just feels different.
Suggested Lady Sansa almost to herself.
Like it or not, I won't ever be back here.
Admitted Arya as she now hoisted the saddle over her shoulder. She grimaced at the pain of the burns on her back.
It's still bothering you?
Inquired Lady Sansa carefully.
It's only been a few days.
Responded Arya, attempting to remain positive in this bleak atmosphere.
I miss him.
Offered Lady Sansa while trying to sound strong.
Sandor?
Asked Arya as they walked back to the dragon.
He saved me so many times I lost count. Yet he never asked for anything in return. Perhaps he was the gallant knight I always prayed for as a silly child.
Lady Sansa revealed as they continued slowly through the Godswood.
Me too,
responded Arya as she limped along carrying Bran's saddle.
You... really... but you're a competent warrior. Whom could he save you from?
Lady Sansa inquired with a genuine curiosity.
myself.
Arya responded simply yet sternly.
You sort of look like him now.
Observed Lady Sansa, all the while attempting to not sound critical.
That bad?
Asked Arya with a sarcastic tone.
No. Honor mostly lives in stories of voice and quill. You wear yours on the exterior.
She paused and faced her young sister.
Wear it well, as he did.
Suggested Lady Sansa while attempting to wear her own emotion well. Jon walked up the stairs to the top room of the broken tower. Pools of blood still streaked the floor. Jon knew Theon was on the roof and this blood was his. By the staircase he saw Heartsbane. Thankfully it remained undamaged. Jon continued up onto the roof. It was there he saw his brother. He was reduced to a charred corpse, but still present. Jon's dragonfire ensured he would not be marching in the Night King's army. Arya joined him after a while, as did Lady Sansa. They noticed the body at Jon's feet. Lady Sansa was overcome, though she held herself together. She walked over to the barricade and pulled the Stark banner from the tower wall. She wrapped it up in her arms and walked over to Jon. She handed a corner to him and took a few steps backwards, unfolding the banner as she went. She bent at the knee and gently placed the Stark banner over Theon's body. Whispered Arya to herself. Minutes passed and the three stood in silent vigil.
I'll meet you at Rhaegal in a few minutes' time.
Announced Jon before departing from the tower. Jon walked through the castle, sidestepping small fires as he made his way down to the crypts. He wanted to see his mother and search for answers. He passed Eddard's grave and Robb's. He was surrounded by death, but it was all he had ever known. Death, loss, and deceit were his inheritance. Lies were his native tongue. It was the first time truly he wondered why he was brought back to life. What purpose could he actually serve, Jon thought to himself. Jon stopped in front of Lyanna Stark's grave. His emotion overcame him as he dropped to his knees. Minutes later, Sansa had joined him. Jon had half expected her to. When she spoke, she did so with care.
I'll never forgive myself for keeping this secret from you, Jon.
You were trying to protect the North.
Jon defended her actions as he rose to his feet.
Which is all I was trying to do as well.
You have every right to be angry with me.
I can't say it won't bother me later. But for now, we need to stand together. I feel it's still going to get worse before it gets better.
I'm glad you came down to the crypts. I have a promise to make to you, and I want Mother and Father to hear me, as well as the Stark kings of old.
Sansa, you don't owe me anything.
But I do. Indirectly, at the very least. When I confronted Daenerys, I was unaware of her inability to bear children.
Jon then turned to his sister, knowing full well how much this topic shamed her.
I want you to know that I am vowing here and now before the old gods themselves, that I will not bear children until Queen Daenerys does.
And what if Daenerys remains childless?
Then the Stark line will pass on to Arya and her children. You know she fancies Lord Gendry.
Jon smiled widely at the thought of House Baratheon and Stark uniting as their fathers desired so many years ago. Jon approached his sister and pressed his palm to her cheek.
If I never know the joys of fatherhood, it is not a sentence I would ever impose on Ned Stark's daughter. I want to teach my nephews to spar and my nieces to dance. Beautiful children with the auburn hair of a Tully.
Sansa dropped her eyes at these words and attempted to steady her voice before retorting.
I have my doubts about her. May I ask you something?
Anything.
Jon replied quickly and enthusiastically.
You sacrificed your crown for your people, because your people mean more to you. Can the same be said for her?
Lady Sansa finished. Jon attempted to choose his words carefully, but instead he chose none. The army of the dead continued past Harrenhal, marching to the east of the castle. Bran watched from the tower window. Samwell was treating Varys, who had still yet to regain consciousness. Queen Daenerys had posted unsullied guards outside his room, day and night.
He'll likely die tonight.
Samwell exclaimed to Bran, to which he had no retort.
I cannot reduce his fever or infection, and his breathing is extremely shallow.
Samwell admitted. Bran remained unfazed at this information. His silence was often a telling sign that he knew how events were to transpire.
You are correct, Samwell Tarly,
responded a confident voice from just outside the room.
and wholly incorrect.
Melisandre finished. Sam gulped as he watched the Red Woman walk into the room.
You cannot cure him, though he will not die tonight.
Added the High Priestess to the pair of men.
Would you care to elaborate? Or are vague expressions your way of making awkward conversation?
Asked Samwell curtly. Melisandre continued taking in the room, acting as if she hadn't heard Samwell as she looked down on the dying Master of Whisperers. Samwell took this as a dismissal as he continued changing Varys's bandages and quickly excused himself. Melisandre now focused her attention on Bran.
My time grows short in this place, Lord Stark.
The Red Woman revealed. Bran shivered at the mention of his title.
Then why waste your time speaking with me?
You are the brother of the king, sort of.
And you need me to convince him of something.
Not something, but everything.
What makes your voice unable?
My credibility with the king is complicated. He trusts you.
Melisandre admitted with a slight sigh. Obviously not having the ear of the king was as troublesome to her as it was foreign.
If that is true, you would also know it would be equally difficult to convince me.
I would expect nothing less from mankind's memory.
Responded the Red Woman with her typical engaging smile. Bran remained skeptical of her intentions. Bran attempted to engage with her thoughts, but her mind was as vast as it was cloudy. 400 years of memories would be difficult to sift through, Bran thought to himself.
What are you asking of me?
I have brought fire and ice together. One cannot defeat death without the other. When Jon Snow seeks out the children of the forest, you must ensure he takes Lady Arya with him.
What makes her so important?
She is one of many, but the one most likely overlooked.
The question of your credibility still remains.
Bran reminded her, and Melisandre turned to Lord Varys's bedside. She removed the golden necklace and gazed into its dark red ruby. A small click was all Bran heard as she removed it from her choker. A simple, thin gold chain was revealed in her opposite hand. She threaded the chain through the ruby and placed it around Lord Varys's neck. When she turned to face Bran, in her place stood a frail old woman. She still wore robes of the deepest crimson, and fires still burned in her eyes. When Melisandre spoke, her voice sounded hoarse and raspy.
I've waited patiently for over a millennium, for the Lord of Light to make his will known. Bloodraven knew, though he did not tell you of your importance. The Lord has finally ordained, not one, but several of you.
Melisandre finished, and she carefully shuffled out of the room, leaving Bran with more questions than answers. Bran had to be assisted to the forges at Gendry's request. The fires raged hot, and Gendry was in the middle of it. Hammers clanged, and the anvils sang as he worked. Gendry noticed Bran's visit and hurried towards him.
How's the progress?
Good. But we're at a stopping point. Our first attempt failed. The steel shattered upon tempering. My master always said he left something out of his instruction, for my protection.
How can I help?
Asked Bran as his eyes shifted to all corners of the forge.
Rumors swirl when you're stuck in a dark room with the same men for weeks at a time. The rumors are you can see into the past. The secret we're looking for is in Valyria, in every forge there.
Lord Gendry admitted, and Bran nodded in agreement.
It may take some time, but I may be of some assistance to you.
Offered Bran. Once he had returned to his tower bedroom, he had a meal and prepared for his long journey. He would travel nearly 300 years into the past, more than triple the distance he had ever attempted. The cause was just and necessary. His worry came from the possible collateral damage. Mankind was already facing extinction, so how could it be worse? Bran took his breaths deep, and his eyes turned blank. The sun was shining brightly. It had been years since Bran had seen the sun on a clear day. The sun warmed his shoulders and tinged his skin. The architecture was a marvel in of itself. The cobbled stone streets, the delicate masonry. It was hard to believe this was the past. Bran looked skyward as dragons flew through the air like birds. He saw nearly 10 of them he guessed to be of different lines. Standing in the middle of the market, he heard a name he recognized. Daenerys. Daenerys Targaryen, said a booming voice. A silk merchant had her order ready. He seemed quite proud of his work, as the young woman had revealed herself. Her hair was silver, and eyes held a purple tinge. She looked as if she could be a close relative of Daenerys. Bran followed her for some time. She had a short walk back to her family's estate. Bran expected to see the sigil of the three-headed dragon, though there were none. The young woman poured herself a drink and admired the merchant's work. They were alone, and Bran thought this was as good of a time as any. The size of their estate was incredible, but Bran desired the forge's location. He would penetrate her mind and simply remind her of the forges. She would lead him there. Bran thought of burning coals, white-hot ashes and blazing fire. Once these thoughts filled his mind, he gently blended his thoughts with hers. Her eyes went blank and she let out an ear-piercing scream. This startled Bran, which made him worry that something had gone wrong. Daenerys screamed Bran's thoughts back at him. The more he panicked, the more she panicked. Once Bran regained control of his own thoughts, he attempted to gently withdraw from hers. She collapsed to the ground as her handmaidens rushed in to assist her. Daenerys was visibly shaken and demanded to see her father. Bran followed her closely as they entered her father's study. Aegon Targaryen was a thin man, hair still silver and flowing in confidence. Bran had started to realize what he had done. Daenerys cried in her father's arms, screaming of fire and ash that would consume their city. Bran prayed her father would dismiss her claims, but history told Bran he would not. Bran awoke in the dark tower bedroom of Harrenhal with Arya at his bedside.
You're awake.
And you've returned,
responded Bran, still recovering his breath. Arya's burned face turned serious as she felt Bran's trouble.
How long was I?
2 days. Not to worry. Gendry figured out the missing step. What is troubling you?
Inquired Arya, and the words stuck in Bran's throat. He swallowed and tried again.
I think I may have caused Aegon's conquest.